Hola, what's the weather like where you are today? Sunny, rainy, cloudy? Comment below.
I watched my brother walk across the stage in that ridiculous blue suit he only wears when he's about to con someone. He shook hands with the regional director, smiled like a politician, and accepted the damn plaque that should have had my name engraved on it. I stood there in the back of the room, clapping because I didn't want to make a scene, nodding like I was proud, all while the pit in my stomach twisted tighter with every word he said. I couldn't have done this without a strong support system, he said into the mic, glancing right at me with that smug little look. Especially my sister Emily, who always has my back. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't dealing with a simple misunderstanding. Kyle had planned this. He'd taken my work, sold it as his own, and now he was bathing in the spotlight while I stood in the shadows. And for what? So we could keep the peace at Sunday dinners? 3 weeks earlier, I had been pulling late nights at my kitchen table, laptop open, fingers numb from typing and editing, and then retyping what was easily the most detailed client campaign proposal our department had handled all year. We're talking multiple brand layers, stakeholder approvals, targeted demographic testing, and a performance matrix that would make most people's heads spin. I was exhausted, but I was in the zone. It was my baby, this project. From the first kickoff meeting, it was mine to lead, and I gave it everything. Kyle, who worked in the same firm but in a different department, would occasionally drop by, usually under the guise of checking in, but really just to scavenge snacks and maybe soak in whatever energy he thought might rub off. I never minded. We were close. At least, I thought we were. One night, around 11:30, I was working on the revised pitch slides. Kyle leaned against the doorway, sipping from a can of ginger ale like he was waiting to be handed a script. "So how's the big project going?" he asked casual, like we were talking about weekend plans. I was too tired to question his tone, so I shrugged and said, "Killer, but it's coming together. Just need to polish the ROI forecast, and it's ready to pitch." He nodded, said something about how he couldn't wait to see the final thing, and left. That was it. Just a normal sibling exchange, or so I thought. I had no clue that he'd already started copying files from our shared company drive. The first red flag didn't hit me until the week before the presentation. I was called into a smaller side meeting with our VP, only to be told they'd decided to shift the lead presenter role to someone with a broader department reach. I didn't even flinch at first. I'm the kind of person who just absorbs bad news with a tight smile, but something about the phrasing stuck with me. Broader department reach? That meant Kyle. My instincts kicked in, but I second-guessed them, because who wants to believe their own brother would do something so low? Then came the awards luncheon, and everything hit me like a freight train. The Quarterly Innovation Award, given for the very campaign I'd built from scratch, was handed to Kyle. The speech he gave? Word-for-word phrases I'd used in brainstorming memos and drafts. He didn't even bother to change the language. He just cut, pasted, and practiced his delivery. And what did I do? I clapped. Like an idiot. Our parents were sitting beside me, practically glowing. Dad said, "He really pulled it together this time, huh?" And Mom squeezed my hand and whispered, "You should be proud of him." I almost laughed. Or cried. Maybe both. That night at dinner, Kyle had the nerve to wink at me across the table. He passed the mashed potatoes like we were still kids sharing inside jokes. I waited until Mom stepped into the kitchen and Dad turned on the TV before I leaned in. "You stole my work," I said, my voice low but steady. Kyle didn't even blink. He just smiled that infuriating slick grin and said, "Emily, come on, let it go. Family first, right?" Then he tapped his glass to mine like we were toasting to a shared victory. I didn't sleep much after that. I'd toss and turn, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario. Should I go to HR? Should I call him out in front of our parents? Should I just bury the anger and move on? That last one gnawed at me the most, because I knew that's what they'd want. Keep the peace, don't cause drama, family first. But something had shifted inside me. A part of me woke up that night, and it wasn't the version of me that quietly took the hit and smiled through the betrayal. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I borrowed Kyle's laptop while he was out playing tennis with his work buddies, and I opened his project folder. There it was, every document, every mock-up, every file with original timestamps that traced back to my own folders. He hadn't even tried to cover his tracks, just renamed a few files, changed the authorship metadata, and packaged it as his own. I felt sick. Not just because of what he'd done, but because of how sure he was that I'd never do anything about it. That night, I opened my own laptop, created a folder, and started dragging every original version of my files into it. I attached the full email thread I'd had with our project stakeholders, highlighting all the early input I'd provided, the back and forth revisions, and even the calendar invites where I was clearly marked as the lead. I zipped it all into one file and sat there, hovering over the send button with Kyle's manager's email typed in. I didn't hit send, not yet, but I saved the draft and labeled it with one word: insurance. What Kyle didn't realize was that I wasn't trying to keep the peace anymore. I was just giving him a little more time to dig his own grave. The morning after I saved that draft, I woke up with the kind of clarity you only get when anger simmers long enough to turn into something colder and sharper, something less about emotion and more about action. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee untouched, just staring at my laptop screen like it was a loaded weapon, and all I could think about was how easily Kyle had done it, how smoothly he'd slid into my spotlight like it was built for him, and how deep down I already knew that no one would believe me unless I made them look, really look, at what had happened. It wasn't just that Kyle had taken credit, it was that everyone from our boss to our own parents had clapped right along with him, as if the story he told, the one where he was the creative genius, was so believable that no one even paused to ask where all that brilliance had come from so suddenly. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't new. Kyle had always had this charm, this effortless way of slipping into the center of things, and people, teachers, coaches, even our own family, had always given him the benefit of the doubt. I used to cover for him when we were kids, writing his English papers or editing his history essays, which really meant rewriting them from scratch while he sat on the couch eating chips and flipping through whatever video game he was into that week. I did it because I thought that's what older sisters did. I helped him cheat on a biology test once, slipping him answers through a shared Google Doc because he was going to be benched from varsity soccer if he failed. It had felt harmless at the time, just sibling stuff, but now that same pattern had matured into something uglier, something that could actually derail my career if I didn't do something about it. I kept turning it over in my head, asking myself if I was making too big a deal out of it, if maybe I was just being overly sensitive or bitter or prideful. But every time I tried to convince myself to let it go, I'd see Kyle smirk, hear him say, "Family first," like it was some kind of excuse for betrayal. And I'd feel that fire burn again. So I called my friend Andrea, someone I'd known since college, someone who knew how to listen without immediately jumping to conclusions. I told her everything about the project, the files, the stolen credit, the speech, the dinner, and the damn plaque. And when I was done, there was this silence on the line that made my stomach twist because I knew what she was thinking before she even said it. "Emily," she said slowly, carefully, "you know you have to do something. You can't just eat this one. Not this time." I didn't say anything right away because the truth was, I'd been waiting for someone else to say it out loud, to give me permission to act on the anger that had been bubbling under my skin for days. "What if it blows up the family?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded when I said it. Andrea didn't flinch. If he cared about the family, he wouldn't have done it in the first place. That settled it. I was done playing the quiet, understanding sister. But I also wasn't about to walk into a war without ammo. I needed a plan, something that couldn't be ignored or dismissed as a misunderstanding. So I started digging. I went back through my sent emails, my calendar entries, the draft versions of every deliverable from the campaign. I combed through my meeting notes, copied out lines that matched word for word what Kyle had said in his presentation, and I built a timeline so detailed that even the most skeptical boss would have to admit the work was mine. It wasn't enough to just tell the truth. I had to prove it, beyond any reasonable doubt. I wanted to dismantle Kyle's little illusion piece by piece, not with shouting or drama, but with facts and receipts and timestamps that couldn't be spun or denied. But while I was planning, Kyle was getting bolder. I overheard him on the phone one night, talking to someone from work, saying things like, "Yeah, I think this might be the start of something big," and "they finally see what I'm capable of." And I wanted to scream, but instead I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. The final straw came the next afternoon, when I checked my inbox and found an email forwarded by mistake. It was from Kyle to our mutual supervisor, and in it he wrote, "Thanks again for trusting me with the campaign. Glad it landed well. I'm excited to keep leading similar projects moving forward." No mention of collaboration, no hint that anyone else had been involved. Just full credit, shameless and clean. I stared at the screen for a long time, my hand trembling slightly as I moved the cursor over to print. I wanted a hard copy, something I could hold in my hand as a reminder of why I couldn't stay silent. After I printed it, I slid it into a folder with the rest of my evidence and labeled it Plan A. That night, I left a post-it on Kyle's desk. Something small, something petty, just to see if he'd flinch. It said, "Interesting how your original presentation uses my exact phrasing from the June 12th draft." He never mentioned it, just smiled a little tighter the next morning and made sure to keep his door closed during calls. I knew I couldn't confront him yet, not directly. He'd just deny everything, twist it into some half-apology that turned me into the villain for being too sensitive. No, I needed to hit him where it would hurt the most. His image, his reputation, the thing he valued even more than family. But first, I needed one more thing. Proof that someone else had noticed the shift, that his manager had questions, even if they hadn't voiced them yet. So I waited and watched and made sure my draft email stayed saved, ready to be sent with a single click. All it would take was one moment of silence, one pause in the routine, one sign that someone in power was starting to put the pieces together, and then I'd let the truth speak for itself. By the time the next week rolled around, I'd stopped waiting for the perfect moment to act, and instead started preparing for war, in the most calculated, unassuming way I knew how, by gathering every shred of proof and organizing it into something so undeniable that even Kyle, with all his charm and bluster and practiced denial, wouldn't be able to talk his way out of it. I wasn't interested in revenge for the sake of revenge anymore. No, what I wanted was far more deliberate and satisfying. I wanted exposure, I wanted acknowledgement, and most of all, I wanted him to sit in that uncomfortable, skin-tight realization that for once, he was not going to be able to hide behind our parents' blind loyalty or his manager's surface-level confidence in him. So I got to work. Most people don't realize just how much digital dust they leave behind when they steal something intellectual. It's not like picking up a wallet or sneaking jewelry into your coat pocket. There's metadata, email chains, version histories, calendar invites, Slack messages, internal memos, and so many little breadcrumbs that, once compiled, tell a story far more clearly than words ever could. I opened 3 tabs, pulled up the shared company drive, the project Slack channel, and my email, and started working my way backwards from the earliest moments of the campaign, building a timeline so detailed it could have doubled as an FBI dossier. Every message I'd sent outlining the campaign's objectives, every early draft I'd uploaded, every note I'd jotted down in Google Docs with tracked changes, all of it was dated, time-stamped, and most importantly, unmistakably mine. I printed some, saved the rest in a neatly labeled folder, and created a mirrored copy on a USB drive that I hid inside the pocket of an old purse I rarely used. Because deep down, I knew I couldn't trust that leaving it on my laptop alone would be safe. Kyle had a habit of snooping, masked under the guise of borrowing my charger or looking for the Bluetooth speaker, and I didn't want to risk him catching wind of what I was assembling. What caught me off guard wasn't the overwhelming amount of proof that the work was mine. It was how brazen Kyle had been in rebranding my work with only minimal edits. As though he genuinely believed no one would look closely, or worse, that even if they did, they wouldn't care. He'd taken my exact phrasing from a slide header, lifted entire chunks of my market analysis, and even included my preliminary taglines for the rollout strategy, changing only the font color and alignment. He hadn't built anything. He'd just rearranged my work like a kid cutting up a magazine for a school project, hoping the glue would hide the source. As I built the case against him, my brain kept cycling through this one memory from our childhood. We were probably 11 and 14. Kyle had broken a neighbor's window playing baseball too close to the house, and I remember him running inside in a panic, begging me to cover for him because, as he said, "Mom believes you more." I did it, without hesitation. I lied straight to our neighbor's face and said it was me, and I paid for it with a week of grounded weekends and 0 screen time. Kyle gave me a crumpled Snickers bar from his backpack by way of thanks. Back then, I thought that was loyalty, that it was something sacred. Now I saw it for what it really was. The first time I let him walk away clean while I took the hit. That memory hit harder than I expected, and I found myself sitting on my bed, the folder of evidence resting beside me, wondering how many times over the years I'd allowed Kyle to rewrite the truth simply because I didn't want to be the one to fracture the fragile piece of our family. I'd convinced myself I was keeping things together, being the mature one, the peacemaker. But now, with every printed page and copied file, I realized I'd just been training him to expect no consequences. By Thursday, I'd compiled a chronological package complete with annotations, source references, and a short summary explaining the context and my role in the project. I wasn't ready to send it yet, but I had it. It existed, and that alone gave me a sense of power I hadn't felt in weeks. But things took an interesting turn that afternoon when I passed by the break room and overheard Kyle talking to someone from sales. He was laughing, loud, confident, the way he always was when he thought the room belonged to him. And he was saying something about probably heading up the next client pitch, and how, once you land a win like that, people finally start treating you like you matter. It wasn't just arrogance, it was entitlement dripping from every word. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't stay silent much longer, not just because of what he'd done to me, but because he was preparing to do it again. I waited until I got home that night, pulled out the USB drive from the purse pocket, and plugged it into my laptop. I drafted a new email, not the final one, not yet, but something more surgical. It was addressed to Kyle's manager, written in calm, professional language, and it asked for a confidential meeting to discuss a recent presentation and the project origin files. I attached a single document, just the comparison slide between Kyle's final deck and my original, with timestamps clearly visible. I didn't send it. Instead, I saved it again as a draft, under a new folder I called Trigger. And right before I logged off, a notification popped up. It was from my own manager, short, polite, and completely unexpected. "Hi, Emily, could we find time early next week to touch base on the Q2 campaign? Just wanted your input on a few things." That was the moment I realized. Someone had started paying attention. Maybe they'd heard something. Maybe they'd seen something. Maybe Kyle's seams were starting to show. Whatever it was, the wheel was turning, and I had every intention of being ready when it completed the full circle. There are moments when the air in a room feels different, not colder or thicker necessarily, but charged in a way that makes even silence feel loud. And that's exactly how it felt the morning I finally opened my laptop with the full intent of hitting send. I had waited long enough, paced the line between loyalty and justice until the soles of my patience wore clean through. And now, as I sat with a fresh cup of coffee slowly going cold beside me, that draft email I'd rewritten and reworded at least a dozen times stared back at me. No longer a hypothetical plan or safety net, but a real, irreversible decision. The cursor blinked like a pulse, steady and quiet. and all I could hear in my head was Kyle's voice saying, "Come on, Em, let it go, family first." A phrase that had started to rot from the inside the more I thought about it, revealing itself not as a noble plea for unity, but a smokescreen for manipulation that had worked for far too long. Before I made my move, I closed the draft one last time and reread everything I had prepared. The email chain showing the original concept discussions between me and the client, the timestamps from our cloud system proving who uploaded what and when, the screenshots of our Slack exchanges where Kyle casually asked for a quick look at your deck just to get a feel, which, in hindsight, read less like collaboration and more like reconnaissance. I even included notes from our supervisor's weekly check-ins, where I had documented feedback and adjustments that had clearly fed into the final version Kyle presented. It wasn't a guess, it wasn't a gut feeling, it was a documented digital trail that led directly back to me. And the only thing left to do was place it in the right hands and wait for gravity to do the rest. But then, almost as if the universe had been waiting to test my resolve one more time, I got a phone call, not from Kyle, not from my boss, but from my dad, who rarely called me during working hours unless it was important. At first, I thought maybe something had happened, some health scare or family emergency, but the moment I picked up and heard his voice, I knew it wasn't that kind of call. It was the tone, the hesitant, slightly rehearsed one he used when he was trying to steer a conversation somewhere uncomfortable without saying too much up front. "Hey, Em," he said, dragging the syllables like they weighed something. "So your brother mentioned there's been some tension between you two at work. You want to talk about it?" And there it was. Confirmation that Kyle, sensing something in the air, had already begun trying to frame the narrative, probably planting seeds of doubt under the guise of concern, likely saying things like, "Emily's been under a lot of stress lately," or "She's just been a little off about the campaign stuff." I could almost hear it, the way he'd paint himself as the thoughtful younger sibling trying to smooth things over before they got out of hand. I didn't respond right away, which prompted Dad to continue in that same careful voice. "Look, I get that things can get messy at work, especially when family's involved, but at the end of the day, it's just a job, right? You two need to stick together." And that was the moment I realized that no matter how much evidence I gathered or how calmly I explained the situation, my family, at least at this point, was going to see it through the lens they'd always used, one where Kyle was the one who needed support, and I was the one strong enough to absorb the hits. I felt something crack a little then, not in a dramatic or angry way, but in a quiet, almost liberating way, like the final thread snapping on a sweater you've known for a while was unraveling. I told my dad I had to get back to work, and that I'd call him later, and then, without letting myself overthink it again, I reopened the email, attached the folder, typed a short message to Kyle's manager, explaining that I hoped the following documents would clarify my role in the recent campaign, and I clicked send. It was done. Irrevocably, finally, unequivocally done. What followed was not an explosion, but a silence so dense it felt heavier than noise. Hours passed. I answered a few work emails, kept my camera off during a team call, and stayed off Slack entirely. My stomach was a pit, but it wasn't fear I felt. It was anticipation, a kind of restless knowing that something had shifted and would not be shifting back. Then, just after 5, my phone buzzed with a short email reply from Kyle's manager. "Thanks for bringing this to my attention, Emily. I'd like to connect tomorrow to discuss in more detail. Please let me know your availability." That was it. No judgment, no immediate reaction, just a scheduled opportunity for truth to be laid out. I didn't tell Kyle. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I made dinner, poured myself a glass of wine I barely sipped, and sat in front of the TV watching some crime show where, ironically, a character was caught forging someone else's work. The irony wasn't lost on me, and I even laughed. A dry, tired sound that didn't quite make it past my throat. I went to bed early, expecting to toss and turn, but I slept like a rock, and when I woke up the next morning, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day of the presentation: clarity. At the office, Kyle avoided eye contact. I could feel it before I even saw him. The way he moved a little faster down the hallway, the way his usual booming laugh didn't echo through the break room that morning. Something had changed, and he knew it. But the real moment, the moment I'll never forget, came later that evening during family dinner. We'd planned it a week ago, some kind of half-hearted attempt by Mom to keep everyone connected, and I almost bailed. But I decided to show up if only to confirm what I suspected. We were sitting around the table, plates half filled with roast chicken and mashed potatoes, when Kyle's phone rang. He looked at the screen, didn't answer, and shoved it into his pocket. But his hand was shaking, just slightly. He tried to keep the conversation light, made a few jokes, but there was sweat at his temples and his collar looked too tight. Finally, in the middle of Mom asking him about that next big project, he excused himself and walked to the hallway to take the call. And I knew I didn't follow him, I didn't eavesdrop. I just picked up my glass, looked across the table at Mom and Dad and said, "I think we're all going to be hearing a lot more about that campaign in the next few days." Neither of them responded. But Mom looked at me differently, like she was trying to read a book she'd never opened before. There are turning points in life that don't come with explosions or courtroom drama or public meltdowns. Instead, they creep in quietly, dressed in polite conversation and subtle glances, and yet, despite their gentleness, they shift something fundamental so permanently that nothing afterward can return to what it was, no matter how badly anyone involved might want to rewind the clock and rewrite the moment. The night of the family dinner, after Kyle took that call in the hallway, his back to us, his voice just low enough to be inaudible, but his body language stiff and alert, I knew that the storm I had been preparing for had finally arrived. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I had seen enough men try to maintain composure under the weight of professional consequences to recognize the way he leaned against the wall just slightly, his free hand rising to press against his forehead, like the physical act of holding his skull together might somehow contain the unraveling. The moment stretched on, and when he finally returned to the dining room, the shift was visible to anyone paying attention. His face was pale in a way that couldn't be blamed on lighting. His shirt clung to his back from a thin sheen of sweat, and he no longer had that usual sparkle of smug ease that so often accompanied him wherever he went. He sat down without saying a word, ignored the plate in front of him, and when Dad asked, "Everything okay at work?" Kyle responded with a tight-lipped smile and a vague, "Just a quick update meeting." That was it. No elaboration, no follow-up, just silence and the sound of forks scraping against ceramic, as if pretending everything was normal might force it to be. But I saw through it. I watched the way his fingers tapped against the stem of his wine glass, the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes, and I knew, without needing confirmation, that the manager had said something. Maybe not everything, maybe not even enough to spell out the full truth, but enough. Enough to shake the illusion, enough to place the first crack in that polished veneer he'd worn for years. Later that night, when I was back in my apartment and the buzz of the evening had faded into quiet reflection, I got a message from Andrea. Did it happen? No context, no preamble, because she knew I'd understand. I just typed, "Yes," and left it at that. Because at that point, there was nothing more to say. The action had been taken, the weight had been passed to someone else, and now all I had to do was watch what unfolded from it. The next day, Kyle didn't show up to the morning meeting. That in itself wasn't suspicious. People skipped meetings all the time, but the absence felt different this time, like a missing puzzle piece you hadn't noticed before, but now couldn't unsee. Our boss looked mildly confused when she called his name and then moved on with the agenda, but I could feel eyes flick toward me briefly, curiosity hidden behind professionalism. I didn't react. I took notes. I asked smart questions. I pretended everything was fine. But by lunch, the whispers had started. In the hallway, near the break room, in hushed tones that trailed off when someone entered the room. People were speculating. No one said it out loud, but I could feel the buzz of it, a rumor hovering just above the surface, waiting to break through. And though no one confronted me directly, I saw it in their eyes. They were starting to connect dots, to remember who had really been leading the meetings before the big presentation, who had stayed late, who had sent the initial files. People were remembering, and they were realizing that the story Kyle had told didn't quite line up anymore. Around 2, my direct manager called me into her office. Her tone was calm but serious, and I knew before I sat down that the conversation was going to be one I'd replay for a long time afterward. She started by thanking me for bringing the situation forward, said she'd reviewed everything thoroughly, and acknowledged the work I had done, not just on the campaign, but in maintaining professionalism throughout. She didn't give me details about what was happening with Kyle, citing privacy, of course, but she said enough to confirm what I'd already guessed. The email had started a process that Kyle couldn't talk his way out of. When I left her office, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't even feel relieved. I just felt tired, because the truth is, exposing someone, especially someone you grew up protecting, doesn't come with fireworks or applause. It comes with silence, with uncomfortable questions from family members, with a new kind of distance that replaces what once felt familiar. And that was what I came home to that night. Texts from Mom asking if we could just talk. Messages from Dad filled with ellipses and hesitation, and a missed call from Kyle himself. I didn't answer it. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. And when I finally listened, I heard exactly what I expected. His voice, tight with restrained panic, saying, "Emily, listen, I don't know what you think you proved, but just call me, okay? We can fix this. Fix this." The words made me laugh, not because they were funny, but because of how wildly disconnected they were from the reality he had built. There was nothing to fix. There was only truth. And consequences. And maybe, if we were lucky, some form of reckoning that would finally force us to see each other clearly. I didn't call him back. Instead, I sat on my balcony with a blanket over my lap, the city humming below me, and thought about all the times I had chosen silence over confrontation, had sacrificed my own comfort to keep peace, had swallowed my voice so others wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something that wasn't guilt or anger or regret. I felt free, but freedom, I've learned, doesn't come without a cost. And part of me wonders, when the dust settles and the phone stops ringing, what version of family will be waiting on the other side?